So Stuart Gordon passed away last week, and Reanimator, at least to me, that's sort of his iconic film. But he did do a bunch of other different types of films, and if you look at his filmography, it is kind of all over the map, almost like in the way the Coen brothers are, because he did, From Beyond, Reanimator, Robot Jocks, and then he wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids for 1989. Which, it makes a weird amount of sense. But yeah, so I don't think I came to Reanimator until much later. I mostly knew it as a gag from the movie American Beauty, where Kevin Spacey makes reference to it in the scene where he's smoking pot outside in the back of a restaurant. Mm-hmm. And then I caught it years later. I'm like, okay, this is why this movie is so beloved. Because I think I'd heard about it when I was a kid, but I thought it was just a cheesy 80s horror movie. But it's a brilliant black comedy, almost with some great dramatic elements, also with that sci-fi element you're talking about. And yesterday I went and I read the H.P. Lovecraft story that it was based on. I don't know, have you ever read that?
No, I don't read an awful lot. Words burn for me. I used to when I was a kid, but I'm more of the movie guy. But I have a lot of friends who are into Lovecraft, so.
Yeah, if you get a chance, the nice thing is it's only like 23 pages long, and it's actually, I didn't realize this until I listened to the Stuart Gordon commentary on the Reanimator Blu-ray. It was originally published as 6 short stories in a sci-fi anthology that he wrote strictly for money. So I guess Lovecraft was not particularly proud of these. And Gordon tells a story about when he had heard about this, because he wanted to make I guess he and some friends wanted to make a horror movie because it's kind of a low budget, easy way to get into filmmaking. He's like, I want to remake Frankenstein.
Oh, yeah.
So he went to the Chicago Public Library. He found like a record of this old pulpy story called Herbert West Reanimator. He had to wait 6 months in order to get the invitation to come back and read the original anthology in the print magazines on premises at the library.
Jesus.
Yeah, so I guess he had Xeroxes made so he could actually take it home, so he wouldn't have to read the entire thing in the library. But yeah, it was wild stuff. Now you can find Reanimator, like it's in anthologies everywhere, but it was obscure for a long time.
Yeah, I wasn't too familiar with it. In fact, until recently, because we revisited this a while back, I didn't even realize it was H.P. Lovecraft. Because again, when I was watching it when I was younger, I didn't notice, but now that I notice Lovecraft, then it makes sense of where it takes place, which is Arkham. It suddenly pieces fell into place a lot more with it. But yeah, I wasn't too familiar with the source material. I just liked it. I mean, Jeffrey Combs, I watch him in anything, and he's just so good in this as Herbert West, and that was my first introduction, I think, to Jeffrey as well. It was him, and then I sought out like all kinds of things that he was in, because it was just like, yeah, creepy guy, all right.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with his work outside of like Reanimator and the sequels. I'm sure I've seen him in other things because he's one of those guys that's been in everything. I think he's actually played every alien in Star Trek in every iteration.
Yeah, pretty much. He's been in Star Trek an awful lot. Yeah, he was in Frighteners as well.
That's right, yeah.
He played the creepy guy, go figure, in Frighteners. He's been in an awful lot of either independent or wider release films too. So, and TV, he's very diverse actor as well, where he's all over the place, which is great. It's always fun to see. But yeah, he's definitely got that kind of iconic, he's one of those characters that come out of films like this that just has that look, that you're just like, yeah, I'll watch him in anything, and you hear his voice. It's one of those things where even if he's in full makeup, like when you're watching Star Trek, I remember watching Star Trek and he played an alien once. I'm like, that's Jeffrey Combs. it's like I recognize that voice, So I mean, yeah, this is one of those films where it's almost a required watching nowadays if you're a fan of B horror. And you're right, though. There is a lot more going on in this film, and I think because it was where it's at and what genre it's in, I think it gets a bum rap because this film actually has a lot of really cool and creative things going on that you don't expect, including the most literal interpretation of getting head ever in cinema, I think.
Very much so. And we will talk about that scene because I got to say, I watched Reanimator, I think it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I watched it, this morning. And I think it's that 2020 lens that we see everything through now. It was disturbing for many reasons, but we'll come back to that. But you're right. It's strange because one of the things that struck me watching it now is it's one of those seemingly rare horror movies, and we kind of talked about this when we talked about Tin Men. Back in the 80s, it seemed like they made a lot of movies that featured adults. I mean, there were their share of like teen horror movies and stuff, but there were also films that were targeted at an adult audience featuring adult characters because the folks that we meet who are medical school attendants, they're still, Barbara Crampton, I think she was 27 when she made this. Jeffrey Combs and Bruce Abbott were, like in their early 30s. So this isn't like, we just got out of high school, now we're going to medical school and doing weird shit. This is about adults thinking about big ideas. You've got Dr. Hall, who's like the seasoned veteran, like brain surgeon or whatever he is, who's kind of power hungry and also really pervy, it turns out. But this is a film that if you take all of the over the top gore out of it, well, it'd be a lot shorter, but you could also you can also have a really cool drama about ideas and personal relationships and really touching stuff between Barbara Crampton's character and her father, which I didn't pick up on until watching it just now. Like, I thought, yeah, the dad just gets turned into a drooling zombie, but there's a lot more going on there. There's like an Anakin Emperor kind of a thing going on in the climax, which was really fun.
Yeah, the Dr. Hill character, Dr. Carl Hill, is interesting. I love one of my favorite scenes, and it's one of those scenes where you get a lot of moments in this film that are a lot better than what you're going to expect it to be. And one of them is where, we know right away when we first meet Dr. Hill and Herbert West, they clash because Herbert West came from a mentor who had the very controversial stuff about reanimating people. And Herbert West is just taking it to the next level. So they clash immediately when they meet. So when West is in Hill's class and Hill's teaching, there's actually a great scene in here that's well directed with tension and dialogue between Combs and Hill, because all Combs is doing as Hill is saying his theories, he breaks a pencil.
Yeah. He breaks a couple of pencils.
Yeah.
It's like a really awkward kind of close up, like West was just sitting there with the pencil in front of his face and snapping it twice.
Well, he's waiting for it. That's what I love about that whole scene, too. He deliberately pulls out a pencil and is just waiting with it right there. You could tell he's waiting for something, and the minute Hill said something he doesn't like, he just pop really loud because it's so quiet because everybody's trying to listen to him. And then he does it again, and then Hill drops that line of, Mr. West, perhaps you should look at getting a pen. But that whole segment, you watch how it's directed with camera and everything. There's great tension there. You convey a lot of ideas of the relationship between these two and everything without saying a whole lot. In this B film with lots of gore, you get scenes like this.
Well, the interesting thing is the way Stuart Gordon would tell it, at least in the commentary. This was his first film, and he was working with a lot of people who didn't know a whole lot about filmmaking. Like Brian Usna was the producer, and they said that they would just go back and watch other horror movies to get ideas about directing and stuff. They learned about like blocking and different angles and cross like lines of sight and stuff later. They just happened to make a really good film by watching other people's stuff. But that scene in the lab, that class scene, almost didn't make it into the movie because they showed it to some people, I guess, were, horror movie aficionados or whatever. They're like, it's great, but you've got this one kind of a, no pun intended, dead scene where there's just a bunch of people talking. I'm like, yeah, this is really rich contextual stuff about big ideas that you're trying to throw in with this, groundbreaking special effects.
Yeah, well, and it also sets up later on the relationship and Hill's, this drive. It kind of sets up the Hill character later on when he gets beheaded by Mr. West. And you see the drive for Hill to actually stay alive, and actually why he is more conscious than maybe some of the other zombies have been, because he's very driven. I mean, you get that wonderful scene later on again between Jeffrey Combs and I forgot who played Carl Hill. But you get that scene again between Hill and West, where Hill busts West for doing the experiments in the basement, and he's looking at it, he's going, wow, this is brilliant stuff. Like, and suddenly they're just two scientists. They're not rivals for a moment. But if you didn't have that scene earlier with them just talking and the pencil snapping, I don't think that scene means as much as it does later on,
Right, and that's a good point. And that scene where Hill goes into the lab and is thumbing through the research, it's a very good point about how he's sort of in awe of the work. And you almost wonder, well, why couldn't they just share the credit? I'm sure they could learn a lot from each other, but West is kind of a smug little prick in his own way, so I don't think that they could ever team up. But the thing about Hill, as we come to find out shortly thereafter, he's got a lot of other issues going on. So.
He's definitely a damaged person. But they both have so huge egos, neither one wants to share credit ever. Are you kidding? But Hill definitely has the experience and is a lot creepier, especially when he's perving on Crampton's character.
Well, let's talk about Megan Barbara Crampton. She's the daughter of the head of this medical school or university, Miskatonic University, of course, with Lovecraft. I'd watched Color Out of Space, or I think earlier this year, and I just kept thinking about, this is probably the same town or like just up the road from from where all that stuff was going on.
Wouldn't doubt it at all. No.
I'm surprised. Maybe it has happened. I'm just not aware of it. But someone should just do a Lovecraft, interconnected universe, like as an anthology series or just a bunch of connected movies. You have Nicolas Cage show up at the end of all of them.
the HPCU.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? They're doing it every. Well, actually, I think. If I remember correctly, Color Out of Space is actually a setup. They are planning on doing more in that exact actual world. Okay. Supposedly, they're doing another HP Lovecraft film that's supposed to be in the same vein. But yeah, no, I'd love to see how they're all connected. I mean, you get Jeffrey Combs. I'd love to see Herbert West go against Nick Cage's character in it. But the way she's written in here, I actually like her as well, because there's it's the 80s and female characters aren't exactly written well, and she's not written great. She is written with more personality than many female characters of that same era were written, especially for a film that has exploitation elements. I mean, she, and I think that's also due to the actress. I mean, she's a great actress. I love her work, and I think she makes a lot of this character as well. And maybe it helps that none of them knew how to make a film, because they didn't have anyone tell them not to do something. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, it's amazing to me that, and it makes sense, especially watching the movie a second time. Barbara Crampton was not the original actress for that role. The person who was supposed to do it, I guess, like a couple of weeks before they were going to start shooting, her mother read the script and she's like, there's no way you're making this, piece of trash. And so she backed out and Barbara Crampton came in. And I think that's, she is fantastic in the movie. Not only is she, beautiful and, to use that term, fearless, because of the stuff that she allows, the situation she allows herself to be placed in as an actress, you really believe her in that role. Mm-hmm. And she's also great. The early scene with Megan and her beau, Bruce Abbott's character, right, Daniel Kane, who ends up being Herbert West's, partner and roommate and accomplice. when we first see them, they're kind of doing a meet cute in the hallway at the college, and then they're in bed together. And then after they get out of bed, they're just playfully doing, ridiculous couple stuff.
Yeah.
They're messing around, but none of that felt really scripted. It just
Hmm.
almost felt like an outtake. Like, how do you write something like that? I imagine it doesn't feel like Stuart Gordon, or I can't remember the screenwriter's name. I've got it here somewhere. I want to give credit where credit is due. Dennis Paoli.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel like they sat down and wrote everything out for this scene. It felt like they just said, okay, turn the camera on them, have them do some, wacky couple shit when they get out of bed, and then Herbert West enters the picture. Um, it felt very, very natural and very weird, because Bruce Abbott does this thing where he pretends to be a corpse rising up out of the bed. There's a detail that's a beautiful callback, a wonderful piece of set decoration. They've got a talking heads poster above their bed. How did I not catch this before?
Yeah, it felt natural between them. And it looked like they were having fun. I wouldn't doubt that it wasn't scripted. He just said, "Here, do some funny things," and then make your way to the door. And then, okay, Jeffrey Combs comes in, and it's like, Uh,
It is like he is like the human version of a cold bucket of water, because when the door opens, they see it's him. And he holds up the little roommate posting card. You're like, oh shit.
Well, yeah, because they met earlier in class, and Kane thought he was just this weird guy, Oh, great! And now here he's at his front doorstep, and it's a lot of fun. I like the dynamic between those two as well, because it kind of had. What was funny is watching it this time again, giving me just a little bit of a Flatliners feel to it. Almost, where they're running the experiment, the one guy, Kevin Bacon, he gets suspended here. Herbert West and Kane, they basically get kicked out of school pretty much once it's found out that they're doing experiments. And it kind of had that feel to it with them. But I just like the way it played off with these two, how you think. What I love is you think Herbert West is going to get rejected by anyone who he actually shows the experiment or whatever to. But these doctors, their fascination and their curiosity is so strong that they're like, okay, sure. Kane is like, okay, fine, I'll sneak into the morgue and we'll inject a guy.
Well, because it's all, based in science. I mean, because they're students, they're there to learn, but also there are people around them who are pushing these boundaries. So they're like, okay, this is maybe our chance to shine and to discover something that could, potentially really help people. It's unclear what the application of bringing dead tissue back to life is, because they're not sure early on if it has anything to do with a soul. Like, they're just amazed when people open their eyes. There's the dead cat Rufus, I think, who goes a little bit nuts.
I love the dead cat scene is just hilarious. And what I love about that scene is it shows what you could do with pretty much no budget. Because there's not a whole lot of animatronics with the puppet. They don't get fancy, but they knock things off the wall and that, like they're trying to chase. And the actors sell it so well. You think they're chasing this cat who's being, elusive, when there's nothing there. They're just pulling pots off the walls, or they're throwing themselves into the wall or whatever, And that's what I loved about that scene. And Rufus is great. And let me tell you, I'm telling you, I love Stephen King, don't get me wrong, but Rufus was giving me Pet Sematary vibes.
Well, it's funny because, reading the Lovecraft story, he wrote this a long, long time ago, but I would be surprised if Stephen King didn't, rip this off. I mean, I haven't read up on the history of Pet Sematary, but it's almost undeniable. And there's also, especially towards the end of the story, not so much the movie, a Hellraiser vibe. So you wonder how much Clive Barker might have been paying attention. But it's funny because Stuart Gordon had said the last shot of the movie, spoilers, by the way, for anyone who hasn't seen RE-ANIMATOR, I guess it's a little bit far in for that. After Megan dies, Dan gets the reanimation serum, injects it into her neck, and then cut to black in the scream. Stuart Gordon had said that was his homage to Stephen King's Pet Sematary. So I feel like it comes full circle, because I bet anything that Stephen King got Pet Sematary, at least in part, from Lovecraft or Reanimator, maybe specifically. Yeah.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, it's great to see influences from other sources, and you see them crop up in newer directors or film guys, and starting to draw the lines of where their influences were, or what they're ode to. Though I will say there is a difference between ode and ripoff, and we actually did a whole episode on podcast on homage versus ripoff. And while there's a lot of homages by Stuart Gordon to other horror films, there is a blatant ripoff in the music to Psycho. Oh my Lord, I love Psycho, one of my all-time favorite horror films, and every time I watch this film, I go, oh, this should not be here.
I agree. I think isn't it Richard Band was the composer, Charlie Band's brother?
Yep. Yeah, Richard Band, who did a lot of work for Charlie Band during, I think this was Empire Entertainment or whatever, the studio just before Full Moon, or during, I think it was just before Full Moon or during. I don't know the whole history. I have some friends who really know the history of Full Moon and that. But yeah, it's Richard Band, Charles Band's brother, who does the music to it, the original music.
Yes, I think it should be a requirement on any like soundtracks. When it says original motion picture soundtrack, it does need to be in quotations. But yeah, it's just like there's a production company called Original Film, and I've seen a bunch of movies that are just copies of other things. That's got to be a joke. But no, it's funny because yes, it is blatant theft, but I think it works for this movie just as it works for Psycho. It's distracting in the case of Reanimator because of that homage or whatever, but thematically it's right there. It's great. I think he added his contribution when he added like a little bit of a techno beat, like a doom.
Yes.
Doom,
yeah.
Underneath. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't complete the entire phrase. He gets about 95% of it, and then on a little original electro type synth 80s sound to it, to vary it up, if you will. Probably 33% enough so it can count as a parody, and he doesn't have to pay royalties to that for completely using the same sound cue. But
my God, if he had to pay royalties, the Bernard Herrmann estate would be like worth $1 billion. I swear. But yeah, I mean, it's the atmosphere of this movie. The movie, partially due to the music, but also partially due to the filmmaking. You brought up that scene where they're chasing after the cat. The actors throw themselves around this room. They're knocking into stuff. I don't even know if it was stunt people, because it looks like Abbott and Combs just going for it, which I really admire and helps to sell this. I mean, Combs was notoriously not in favor of being drenched in blood, and a lot of the reactions of him just kind of are supposedly real. But yeah, everybody goes for it in this movie, and there's so much blood throughout this that it just becomes beautiful. Even when Dr. Hill gets decapitated and he spends the last third of the movie in this pan, just the way that the trickles are in his face and it gets all in his teeth. I mean, there's these beautiful little motion paintings all throughout the film.
Well, I mean, and just think about it in general, what they're doing for the budget they're on. The whole thing where with the Dr. Hill and Headless, you think that's just going to be like a one-trick gimmick. Okay, they did their thing, but the last act of this film, you've got a headless body walking around, though they put a fake head on it eventually, with another head that they're selling quite convincingly is still alive when they put it in the pan, and the way the body is moving and everything. I mean, you think about what they're doing in 85. It was very impressive what they accomplished in doing that particular gimmick, which goes on, plays a major part, this headless body, and putting him on the pan and having it move as he's having his body try to do a nasty thing with, the lady on the table, but you look at the effects end, try not to look at what's actually going on and what technically is going on. And it's damn impressive, and you can see why people, like we are here, still talking about this movie today. It's one of those reasons why I love films like this, because I think through a 2020 lens, sometimes people take things for granted that you see in film now, and so they look back then and go, "Oh, that's not impressive." I'm like, that was 85, and they had a talking headless guy walking around with a headless corpse, fighting people and doing stuff, and like you said, the blood, the gimmick they did where they don't explain it, but he puts a bag of blood in the pan with his head so that he could survive. And, I love that little bit because it stays consistent throughout. When he travels later on and he's in the morgue, they do the exact same thing. There's bags of blood, So they actually keep some continuity in this film too for what it is, And it's one of the reasons why I love especially early Charles Band before he got he always was, a commercial looking to make a buck, but these earlier films always seem to just have a little better spirit than his later stuff that we've talked about. Evil Bong.
I will have no disparaging of the Evil Bong series on my show, sir.
That's perfectly fine. Okay.
Groundbreaking cinema.
Yeah, something like that. But I know he was producer. He wasn't directly directing in that. But still, this was the type of stuff they were coming out in the mid '80s, and it's why horror fans, especially, talk about these films so much, because you get like RE-ANIMATOR, which by any means had, if you look at this, if it probably had a better marketing budget, could have easily been released to widescreen theaters. It's that good of a quality for 85 horror. It could have easily gone up against the other big ones that got wide release. It's just is a little controversial because a little more gory. You had more exploitation elements in it, which probably scared studios, but I couldn't see why this wouldn't get wide release.
Yeah, I agree. It's just as far as the quality of the filmmaking and the ideas and the story and the special effects, frankly, yeah, it's way up there. But yeah, the censors would not let this fly. I think there was a story about how they were told to remove like all of this different stuff, and if they had taken all of it out, it would have been a 40-minute movie. Like literally all the offensive material, just you lose an hour of the film, or like 50 minutes, because it's a tight like 120 minute movie, which is amazing to me because it does flow really quickly, but you get so much. One thing I noted, the doctor that Herbert West was helping out in the beginning of the film, I don't know if you caught his name, but it's about homage.
Gruber.
It's not only that, it's Hans
Gruber. Yes. Yes. I caught that they called him Hans Gruber, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, I'm good. I can roll with this.
Because Die Hard came out 3 years after this, so I just wonder if the people. Well, I know Die Hard was based on a novel, so I don't know if Hans Gruber was in that book, but I just like to think that someone on Die Hard was a big RE-ANIMATOR fan. Like,
if it's not true, we can live in that world to where it is true, because I'd like to think of that. And then I'm sitting there, my mind's going, is he a relative of Hans?
I was just gonna say that's how we bring Die Hard into our HPCU.
we're borderlining on the whole theory that everything spawns from the kid's head from St. Elsewhere, so we've got to be careful of that. You've heard of that theory, right?
Oh yeah. It's the snow globe thing.
Yeah, where everything's connected to the one kid from the ending of the St. Elsewhere series, I think it was. And it's bad because if you look at the argument, you make some assumptions, but it's like it's kind of scary how it actually works with a lot of things. So,
Well,
Die Hard.
Here's your next project, though. I mean, you've been doing 52 degrees KB. Next year, you'll have to start 52 degrees SE and just tie everything back to St. Elsewhere. And that will take 25 years.
There you go. I've got my show planned for the next 2 decades after that. But yeah, you look at films like this, and it's always frustrating when I see people who go, and we've talked about this before, with like the Joker now, where people won't look past a film past, whatever, 2000 or whatever. But I mean, you look at RE-ANIMATOR and what they did, and then you look at like even horror movie directors and stuff later on, you're like, there's the influences there, who RE-ANIMATOR had its influence from Lovecraft. So you kind of draw this line and this kind of leapfrogging thing of influences. And yeah, we're not just blowing it out of proportion, folks. This film, you're right, it clips along nicely. The story is tight. There is very little extra in this, but they still work in little subplots with Hill, which actually ties into the regular plot, and the relationship of the daughter with her Dean dad, and the relationship of dad with her fiance, and all of that is very tight because they're filming this, I think 85, I think they shot this on film, so of course a low budget film like this is going to not have a lot of fat because film is expensive.
Well, yeah, and they shot this in the end of '84. They shot it in 18 days. And I think that last day was a 24-hour shoot. And Gordon tells a story about how when he and his wife, Caroline Purdy, actually plays the female doctor in the beginning of the film who's mentoring Bruce Abbott's character. Apparently, when they were driving home back to their apartment from the last day of filming, Stuart Gordon was behind the wheel and he actually started to go blind, so they had to pull over.
Oh, Jesus.
It was like that extreme level of exhaustion.
Yeah.
And so she had to take the wheel and get them the rest of the way home. But no, I mean, you were saying something earlier about how this would have stacked up against other horror films of 1985. I mean, this might just be old fogey man talking, but I feel like this could stand up to, this could be almost released today, because aside from maybe some of the hairstyles, but not really, it's a very contained movie. It's not like you've got people out driving around and like, oh, look at all those old cars. I mean, it's essentially a couple of exterior shots of houses and campuses, and then it's just sets like a morgue and an office building. I mean, there's not a whole lot in here that makes it look like, oh, this thing looks really antiquated, and there's no cell phones. No one's Googling anything like how to reanimate dead tissue.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It does, and that's the one joys of practical effects. I've had this discussions many times with many of my friends, and why I love practical so much, because they hold up so well later on in years when you revisit those films. CGI will date the film a lot quicker than practical effects, and you got nothing but practical effects in here. And you're right, most of the wardrobe that everybody's wearing are doctor's clothes, or they're dressed up a little bit, which doesn't really scream the period. You're basically in just a number of sets, either in a class, the surgical classroom, the morgue, or the apartment, or an office. There's not a whole lot of locations either to really give away, and there's very few, if any, cultural references outside of, the posters in the background. But as far as in the dialogue and the story, there's really not culture. So yeah, you maybe tweak it slightly, but it could definitely come out today, especially on VOD, and hold up very well. Even more so to some of the other indie stuff with the same budget.
Yeah, it's funny. When we first see Herbert West in that kind of the prologue where he's, ostensibly with Dr. Gruber, he's turned his, medicine on him, or it's unclear because it might have been that Gruber was experimenting on himself. I don't know. But West is a mess. The next time we see him, he's being introduced at the college And this is the coolest, perhaps, that Jeffrey Combs has ever looked on film. He's got this great, like, big kind of almost like feathered hair. He's in a black suit. He could almost play, the slick kind of smarmy Dean character if they reverse the roles a bit. You stay away from my daughter. But going back to the character dynamics a bit, you touched on something about like Dean Hill's or the Dr. Hill's relationship with the dean of students, who's the father of the girl that he's like obsessed with.
Yeah.
Again, you take all the reanimated corpse stuff out of it, you've got a really creepy relationship movie, almost like a Me Too situation. Like, who's going to believe this girl if, the dad's best friend, who's like this man of power, is putting on the moves on her, and you got this kind of bumbling fiance who's trying to make sense of it all. Yeah.
Well, and especially, I mean, you could see Hill easily, if you made it into a drama of sorts, you could see Hill easily trying to pull the card of, well, do this with me or your fiance will get kicked out of school. I mean, there's only one step away. You could see his character totally doing that, and you're right. Yeah, you take away the gore in that. Yeah, you got to add a lot of things, but you still have this kind of creepy college drama, with only this one just has reanimated cats. So,
but here's what I would like someone to do, because I'm not going to do it, but someone out there, I know there are obsessives with like the Lifetime TV movies. I guarantee someone has taken the B plot from Reanimator and turned it into a Lifetime movie. Exactly what you've just described. I want to know what that is so I can watch it.
Probably. I'm sure some Lifetime for movie person has probably changed it into that, or Hallmark,
Hallmark's another good one. Yeah. Hallmark. There's probably something on OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network. I don't know.
I'm not sure, but I wouldn't put it past them.
So let's stop pussyfooting around.
No, nice.
Okay, yes. Okay. Intended, fine.
I was going to say that was intended. Come on.
It wasn't until it came out of my mouth. I'm like, I'll own it. There's the scene, the one that this movie is really known for. I mean, there's so many great iconic elements to this film that it's almost sad that this, brief little encounter is the one that the hallmark. But it's when Megan has been kidnapped by the headless Dr. Hill and brought into the morgue and set on a slab, and the doctor's body picks up the head, or after restraining her with these big thick leather straps, which
and ripping off all of her clothes,
right,
in
and
one
making
fail swoop.
Two swoops.
Two swoops. I'm sorry.
Dress,
yeah.
And then I didn't caught this part before, but he takes another swipe and I knocked over my microphone. And gets the panties.
That's right.
I guess to really drive home what's about to happen. Here's a question. Why do they have these leather restraints in a morgue?
I hadn't thought about it till you asked me that, because I was just, you're just rolling with the scene. Why they have the restraints? Maybe to keep the bodies in place, if they're really beat up or something. I'm not sure why they would have the leather restraints on a morgue table. Who knows what that morgue doubles as on off hours? I don't know.
Well, there are plenty of hospital experts who are very busy right now. So if someone wants to write in, they can probably clue us in. So he restrains her naked form on the table and proceeds to, the body picks up the head and is just like moving down every inch of her body. And I can just imagine how uncomfortable this must have been for everybody involved. There's a story that the actor, I'm going to look up his name and get it right for the credits, because the actor who played Dr. Hill, David something, apparently in a test screening or an early screening, he was watching this with his wife, who got disgusted and said, "How could you?" And she got up and left the screening.
This is why, folks, you do not have your significant others watch your work if you're an actor. David Gale.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny. Right before you said that, his name popped into my head. So
well, there you
we're
go.
on a wavelength.
We're on a wavelength here, yeah.
Well, just as he had manifested these psychic powers to bring all these other corpses in the morgues back to life, which I found out was the result of a subplot that they had taken out of the film at the last minute. We're vibing. You sent that message to me, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
But yeah, so the head, it doesn't. I think it's a misconception because Dr. Hill doesn't actually get a chance to go down on Megan.
Right.
He's right there, legs wide open. It's shot from the side, and he's like going in for the kill. And all of a sudden, Jeffrey shows up.
Yeah, they get interrupted just before. A lot of people, I think there's a misconception with that he actually manages. No, he attempts, but yeah, the way it's cut, he immediately shows up before anything really, never mind, he did go down the body, so there is that. But mad props to Crampton for that scene, especially in an indie film. But I think, yeah, there's some misconceptions with it, and that is the iconic scene because it's so disturbing, which it is. I mean, when you watch it, even today, but what I like, what I say the term I like how it was set up with his character. It didn't feel like it was just thrown in there to shock people and to be vulgar. You could totally see the Dr. Hill character in his state of mind doing this because all of his inhibitions and restraints went away when he died. And now that he's a reanimated headless corpse, and he's come back from the dead, he feels like he can do anything. And so he's going to do this. And it felt within character. I mean, you and we've watched many films since, and you can tell usually when a scene is done specifically just to shock you, just to go, oh my God, just to get talked, buzzed, whatever, solely. And in this one, though, yeah, I'm sure that was part of it, but part of it, though, it felt like it fit this character and what monster he has become. So, it didn't feel like it was just in there for gratuity. It actually made sense with the character.
Yeah, and it is one of those things that walks the very fine line of exploitation, because you do have this very beautiful, extremely naked woman having these horrible things done to her. So you have to wonder, like, is this meant to be titillating? Is it meant to actually be off-putting to the audience? And I think the answer for some viewers anyway is somewhere in between. I know for myself, I'm like, well, Barbara Crampton, especially 27-year-old Barbara Crampton in 1985 was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen on film. But on the other hand, she's in a position that is very uncomfortable. She's being sexually assaulted. The fact that the guy is a zombie doesn't make it any less, gross thematically as much as it is hard to watch, practically.
Well, it's gross, but I think part of it is it's one of those to where it's so ridiculous with the situation. Even, yes, the act is horrible, don't get me wrong, and especially through 2020 eyes, it is disturbing. But at the other hand, too, you look at it and go, well, how people can watch this? It's like, it's a guy's headless body holding a headless animated head, doing this. So, yeah, on one hand, and it shows you why people, dig this film is you get mixed emotions in that. On one hand, you're going, holy crap, this is disturbing. On the other hand, oh my God, this is ridiculous, because he's just playing it up with just like, so ridiculousness that within the context of what you're seeing, you're just like, man, that is ridiculous. To the point of to where it's not exactly disturbing so much as in a way comical enough to where it's not making you so uncomfortable you can't watch it. Yes, right. It's uncomfortable that you can watch it, but at the same time you're going, wait a minute, this is some prosthetic head, just blood dripping from it and everything. And so it's an interesting scene. And even looking at it through 2020 eyes, I think the way the whole film is, and its tongue is in its cheek in many spots, it's deemed as a comedy. I think it's one of those to where it doesn't have quite that impact as if this film was a serious film, kind of like for extreme example, I spit on your grave type thing, or if it was put into a serious context. But the way the whole movie sets you up by that point in the film, you're like, did you see the reanimated cat corpse? I mean, come on.
That's an excellent point, because this isn't a horror movie. It's got a lot of graphic violence and disturbing ideas and elements in it, but strictly speaking, it is it's like a black sci-fi comedy. So the filmmakers, we're on Stuart Gordon's side from the beginning. So I think there's enough of that earned credibility that up towards the end, it's disturbing because we're watching something that is just plain wrong on several levels, but it's also, there's a feeling that we're in good hands. Like, he's not going to do something like I Spit on Your Grave is an excellent example where, the cast, they all knew what they were signing up for, but you also get the feeling that there's some really dark undercurrents there in terms of the movie. That's the intent of what's being shown. Yeah,
dark undercurrents is right with I Spit on Your Grave. The original, not the remake. I won't go there about that. But I mean, I'm not saying, especially in today's world and more experienced me, I'm not saying everything that's portrayed on camera all the time, especially in the old films, is right. But I also think there needs to be some context involved to look at it, to go, I couldn't see that scene happening today, but at the same time, I don't think there was ever any ill intent or danger to the actress, or anything, any dark undercurrent, at least in this film. They're doing something completely ridiculous that in a serious drama would totally turn you off, and in here it kind of does, but at the same time, you're like, it's a plastic head. It's the way he directs it, the way the music is, everything about it. Even, some of her selling it with the reaction, she does very well with, the screams and being scared at that. But at the same time, it's just the feeling. And like I said, it's context. And I think some of these movies, we have to look at it like that within the context of what was being done. And again, not justifying that it really should have been done, but I think that we sometimes get a little too over the top with our sensitivity, and we're talking about RE-ANIMATOR, for crying out loud. I mean, it's whereas you get a film like, even I watched it, part of it the other night again, Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave, or Hills Have Eyes, in that if you look at the environment and the atmosphere of the entire movie, when those really horrible things are happening, they're intended to be a different reaction than in RE-ANIMATOR, where you're getting this scene where yes, it is a serious act, but at the same time, at no point do you feel like this is supposed to be like get you angry.
Well, and what Gordon and Paoli do with this movie that I think is a great evolution from Lovecraft. First of all, Lovecraft, apparently, I'm not that steeped in his his writing or his lore. He never really wrote female characters.
No.
So there is that kind of a a bonus, taking that source material and giving it a kind of a fresh, different perspective that really works in terms of the. But they. I just completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. God, I hate this. Let's pivot. If I think of it, I'll come back to it.
Sure.
But, it was a good point too, and I hate that. There is something about this story that lends itself to being modernized, reinterpreted, having strong characters and a lot of connective tissues that weren't there in this kind of serialized, made for money kind of a pulpy thing. But in terms of what they're looking at doing today, I mean, right now we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So you've got people all over the globe doing all sorts of, experiments and trying, let's try anything that works,
Hmm.
just from a scientific level that could have a practical, human application. You can almost do a Reanimator sequel set in the middle of the global pandemic. In fact, hey, maybe that's how this thing got out in the first place.
There
Where's
you go.
where's Dr. Herbert West?
Yeah, where is West? We haven't seen him. Though I say this in complete jest because it is very serious, but we laugh because we cry. I would say I am missing the reanimated corpses, though. We've got all the other elements in place. We don't have the reanimated corpses.
Yeah, and thankfully, that's
thankfully, yes.
Of all the
thankfully.
things that are on the menu, that's not one of them.
No.
But yes, full disclaimer. Hope everybody is safe and sound because,
Yes.
as Mark pointed out, we laugh because we don't want to cry.
Well, we've watched enough pandemic films. It's just one of those situations where you're like, wow, life is imitating art in a lot of ways. So these movies now that we thought were kind of, oh, that would never, oh, that right. You look at it now and almost word for word, sometimes we're getting the exact reactions we've seen in pandemic films for ages, either zombie films or infected films or whatnot. So that's why, as a horror film watcher, I'm just waiting for that other shoe to drop because I'm like, everything else is feeling so familiar from those films. It's very eerie,
Well, if you ever get a chance to read the story, there actually, because it jumps in time, because it's a 6-part kind of a thing, and each episode sort of picks up like a few years or sometimes many years later, and these guys are still partnered up. They're sort of bound at the hip after a while for guilt reasons, but they actually do. I think they go through World War I together, which is weird because they're field doctors and they have awesome access to a lot of fresh dead bodies. But I think before that, there was some kind of a pandemic or a plague that they had to work through, which again gave them access to a lot of dead bodies. And they're working under the assumption that, like, oh, we're trying to find a cure. We just need more material to work with.
Funny you should mention that. It's been a long time since I went through because I watched all of the films. One of the films, I think it was the latest one. Maybe it was Beyond Reanimator. Or it was in the sequel, in one of the two, and I apologize to my Spoiler Room crew member and longtime friend Dawn. She loves these movies, but one of them actually opens with them in war doing that.
I think it's the second one, Bride of Reanimator. I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, there is an opening scene where they're field medics. I think it might be during Nam. I'm not sure. There's some conflict anyway going on, and they are they're doing those type of experiments on soldiers. So they do work that in later on in the sequels.
Well, I sincerely, art can take a break from imitating art, life.
Yeah. Life can take a break from imitating art. Yes.
And vice versa,
yes.
Because I know the impulse is going to be someday, because this is a historical event we're living through. Someone's going to start making movies about this. I will not necessarily be lining up to see that.
You didn't see then the announcement that they actually have a movie already coming out called Corona Zombies, I think it is. Corona Zombies is put out by I think it was our man Charles Band. I'm not sure exactly offhand, but I'm not kidding you. It is Corona Zombies, a government asleep at the wheel, the wealthy shrug it off, a global toilet paper famine, and a virus that causes its victims to get up and kill. They kill, then they kill and get up and kill again. Corona Zombies is an official film. It got announced. Oh yeah, full moon. Told you. Charles Band. The band we were just talking about. That's why when you said that, I had to look it up. Charles Band just made a Corona Zombies film. There's a trailer out already for it. The news about it dropped at the beginning of March.
At the beginning of March.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Oh.
Never.
This is pre-shelter in place. They probably figured, oh, it's this little outbreak that is going to be going away by the time it ends. It's essentially the evil bong of virus movies.
Well, they announced it, and then the trailer, I think, dropped last week. So that's the joys and the double-edged sword of digital technology, everyone, is that you can shoot a film today, edit it by the end of the week, and have it out next week with clips that is topical to today's pandemic. In this case, Charles Band and Corona Zombies.
Look, I'm not saying I will never watch that movie, but for now, I'm going to keep my social distance from Corona Zombies. Jesus.
Charles Band, always looking to make a buck. That's why I like his earlier stuff, like Reanimator, the stuff that he produced in that. I like his earlier stuff a little better than the later stuff. The mid 80s, mid to late 80s, early 90s stuff is just so much fun. Like Reanimator, all those films. I'll just watch those again and again. Doll Man and Demonic Toys and
sure, and even Dolls, another Stuart Gordon movie. It's great film. So let's kind of wrap up this Reanimator look / Stuart Gordon tribute with an actual tribute to Stuart Gordon. I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your favorite non-Reanimator Stuart Gordon film? And you cannot say Robot Jox because you talked about that before.
Come on. Now you took it away because, it was Robot Jox.
Okay. I will allow Robot Jox.
Thank you. It is my favorite. Watching it on Blu-ray again, I'll watch it. It's one of those films I could just watch again and again. It is ridiculous, but the stuff that he does in there is pretty cool, again, for a limited budget with the stop motion animation and everything. And watching it recently, I'm like, the light flew on in my head, and I'm like, holy crap, some of these scenes and everything, Guillermo del Toro had to have been influenced this when he did Pacific Rim, because it's not just the big robot angle, but the way the script plays out and some of the characters. I'm like, it had to have influenced it. Robot Jox, I really enjoy. Reanimator, obviously. Dolls is a good one as well. You're right. He has a kind of a diverse library of films that he did, and they're all entertaining. But yeah, Robot Jox would be my go-to Stuart Gordon film.
I gotta, I've never seen Robot Jox. I saw the trailer when I was 11 or 12 years old. I'm like, that looks awesome. And I just never got around to watching it. I gotta wonder, I have seen that Hugh Jackman movie from like 10 years ago, Real Steel, which, not knowing anything about Robot Jox, it still felt like it might have some, lineage back to Robot Jox. And that's the kind of cool thing. You mentioned Guillermo del Toro. He and other filmmakers like, James Gunn, who does, doing Disney movies. Well, now he's doing DC stuff. But these are all filmmakers who kind of started out as admirers and even practitioners of low culture, so-called. You got James Cameron. There's a proud underground history in Hollywood of people who like these so-called bad movies that end up incorporating their love for them into these big budget, things later on, which I think is just awesome.
Well, and that's what I love is, Sam Raimi is one of the big ones.
Yes.
Here's a guy who did these low budget, Evil Dead films with his buddies, and suddenly he's in charge. It seems to go to superhero films. I don't know the real connection there, but for some reason, superhero films end up getting these indie horror directors or guys that, were cutting their chops during the 80s. Even Peter Jackson, the guy who was in charge of a generation's quote unquote Star Wars in the form of Lord of the Rings. He made Bad Taste. He Meet the Feeble. I mean, he made some pretty zany, one of the goriest films ever made, you could say, Dead Alive. He made those type of films, and then he's making these huge budget films. Like you mentioned, James Gunn is another one who's, making silly horror films, and suddenly he's in charge of a MCU film, and a lot of those influences come through. And I think why those guys get those jobs is because through those films you can see the talent there, and there's a actual legitimate passion because they're making those films to make films, not necessarily to make money. And so I think that appeals to producers when they're looking for someone new to do their product or handle their product, is someone who cut their chops on the low budget stuff and didn't start out right away with the new, the bigger budget stuff. In all honesty, I would say that's part of the problem. But one of a few, many would say, with M. Night Shyamalan films, is that his first major studio film or whatever took off, and he had a gimmick in there. And it almost feels like with every of his subsequent films, he had to put it in there because that's what was expected. Because it's, whereas you get a James Gunn, a Sam Raimi, a couple other off the top of my head, I can't quite think of. Even J.J. Abrams of sorts. You got these guys who have cut their chops on the indie scene and kind of been in the trenches and worked with minimal budget or whatnot. Robert Rodriguez is another one. El Mariachi, what he made that, next to nothing. They cut their chops on indie films, and I think that's what appeals to people, to the producers later on. And some directors choose to stay in their low budget lane, like Stuart Gordon kind of did, but other ones, they get these, but they've been influenced by films, the Full Moon films, and that if you don't see the influences in there, you're missing it. I mean,
yeah, I mean, very much so. And like with Stuart Gordon, he's he was a native Chicagoan. Turns out he graduated from Lane Tech High School, which was like right down the street from where he used to work. It's there's that sort of a Midwest quality, to it. He's kind of stumbled into filmmaking and found some success with it, but you don't ever get the feeling that it went to his head. And he, worked with a lot of people that he would work with throughout his entire career. He made some fantastic discoveries, put people on the map, notably Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs. It's with his passing, I wasn't, all beat up and sad about it, but you do kind of feel like there is an entire generation of filmmakers, older filmmakers, who are passing away now, and with them some of their sensibilities, like Wes Craven, a number of years ago. They weren't exactly in the same, not the same forte. That's probably a bad bad choice of words, but just this sensibility that we're losing from these filmmakers from the 70s and the 80s and even up through the 90s. I don't know who they're going to be replaced with, or even if that style of filmmaking is just going to pass away, and I hate to see that.
Well, I think part of the reason the filmmaking, and it's one of those double-edged swords. Anyone can take their phone and make a film now, whereas back then, even with camcorders out, and you get a lot of the shot on video fare, which some of it's just crazy as well. It was still a little bit tougher for them to film stuff like this, or it took some more effort than just being able to shoot. And so it is awesome. We have this technology now to where everyone can make a film, because I've seen some really cool stuff made by people just out of their backyards, and then I've seen some really horrible stuff. But I don't think so we're in a kind of a different age, and I think the spirit is there, but the sensibilities, like you mentioned, I don't think is going to be quite there anymore, because it just always felt like these films, they were making them, and great if they make it on, direct to video and get distribution, awesome. Okay, my film's out there. Versus today, where it just seems like you see a lot of these films being made either on phone or whatnot, where people are doing it with the intention of going viral. They're doing it with the intention of being a cult film, which, if you deem yourself, here's a word of advice from this old guy, pardon my soapbox, but if before your film's released, you're promoting it as the next cult film, you're missing the definition of a cult film. Okay.
Right. I mean, it's it's something that needs to be discovered and sort of a natural kind of a homegrown fan base, right? And you can't predict that, especially when you've got 3,000 other people that week trying to also create their own low budget cult film. It's just like when companies a few years ago, they'd say, "Oh, we want to make the next viral video." I'm like, it doesn't work that way.
No.
We want to make the next meme. It's because there are meme factories, and
yes.
Why pay someone to do something that you can see for free on Facebook, 30 times a day, kind of a deal. So I agree. It'll be very interesting to see how people look back on this era of filmmaking. Will they have the same fondness or the same depth of material to draw from that we will from the 1980s? I mean, look at 1985. That alone, you could build an entire decade's worth of podcasts about. This is something I wrote down. 85 was also Day of the Dead, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Another film featuring zombies that are, a mad doctor experimenting to see if you could make intelligent zombies. It's like Bub would be right at home there.
But he would be. He'd probably have them controlled, or he would fight the Dr. Hill for control. Maybe I'm not sure.
That's the next crossover in our HPCU.
There's a crossover.
Oh man.
Whew, yeah,
possibilities are endless.
They are. They're definitely endless. Now Charles Band heard that, and next thing you know, he's going to write that. So, and probably produce it next month.
I might just go back and clip that last bit out so that it doesn't go into the universe and he catches wind of it.
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, damn
Don't get you in trouble with Full Moon. So.
I'm going to Full Moon that Corona Zombies idea. Anyway, Mark, thanks a lot for talking Re-Animator and completely diminishing my spirits with the talk of that Corona Zombies movie. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Here to crush dreams and break people. So that's my purpose in life. Trust me, when I saw it too, I rolled my eyes so hard. I'm just like, oh my Lord. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, coming next episode, we'll be reviewing Corona Zombies because that's how All right, man. Well, thanks again for talking a little bit of Stuart Gordon, a lot of Re-Animator, and everything else in between. I appreciate these conversations, and I love that this Corona apocalypse has given us more chance to talk about movies. This has been a lot of fun.
This was. I always enjoy talking these films and discussing movies with you. So yeah, thanks for having me on again.
All right, man. Well, take it easy, and we'll talk about something else real soon.
Sounds good.
All right, bye, man.